Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Refiners Fire podcast, which is something that was started, I don't know, a year ago, 2 years ago. Time is flying, but for various reasons, it didn't continue. However, we're going to bring it back because after the major news this week of Canada's election, I think it's time to have a discussion from a conservative and Christian perspective on all things politics and culture and social issues. So I am going to bring on my friend Dave, who lives in the marvelous province of Alberta, and we're going to have a little just sort of off the cuff discussion about all of this. Welcome, Dave. How are you doing?
I'm a little disappointed, as my title says.
Yeah.
That was a hard one to take, to digest. But deep down, not surprised whatsoever. Because, as you said, I am from Alberta, but I lived half my life out east in Ontario.
Hmm.
And I know the thinking processes of
Hmm.
individuals out there and as a whole. And that's not pointing out any one specific, but you do get a flavor of Alberta versus Ontario. And I can tell you there, especially when I moved there 25 years ago, now I'm back in Alberta, but back then I can, with all honesty, tell you it was a different culture compared to
Mm.
Alberta. Now that is changing because the two are beginning to merge on both sides of the country now, but we can
Yeah,
discuss that as we go into this. So. How
sure.
did you
Yeah.
feel about this election?
I was pretty emotional about it, actually, which I didn't expect. I wasn't full blown no meme like the Trump person. I don't want to be that person. I'm not going to get on TikTok and cry about it, but I was really despondent about it and frustrated. And then I had to just reset because I guess I didn't get my hopes up per se, but just I thought perhaps maybe things were at least shifting enough to get a minority conservative government, which is something that seemed in the bag just a couple
Mhm.
of months ago. And now here we are, and we're seeing how everything has shifted, especially since the whole, Trump 51st state tariffs thing happened. It seemed like all of a sudden everybody shifted. And I was hoping the polls were wrong because the polls are often wrong. So I was
Yeah.
disappointed, but mostly I'm just frustrated because, okay, fine. This is what Canadians want. Okay, you voted for it. But why? Why are you doing this to yourselves? Everyone is just shooting themselves in the foot. And it's so disappointing to me because it feels like COVID all over again. People are
Yeah.
just getting sucked into the panic of propaganda, and I'm so disappointed that my fellow Canadians, and in particular for me, I'm frustrated with women in Canada because it feels like there's so much emotional voting and people aren't paying attention. They're just going on Facebook, seeing headlines, getting sucked into this drama, and they're not reading, they're not watching HOC debates, they're not doing anything, they're not reading policy, they're not even reading the policies of the different parties and the platforms. So it's hard for me because I just went through a massive women's conference with Lisa Bevere in Saskatoon. And of course, she's quite
Mm.
political and quite right leaning. And she was talking about not being hard on your own gender and really believing in God's purpose for each gender. And I admit and had to repent of the fact that I have been a little harsh on women. But then I come to this situation and I'm thinking, okay, but Canadian
Mm.
women, though, seriously,
Yeah.
please try harder.
And not to interrupt, but beyond that, they were saying that the boomers shifted because the boomers who
Yes,
don't watch any of this type of media,
yes,
or very little of it, or very controlled media, if they do, as you said, Facebook feeds what they want
yeah,
onto the algorithm. And those boomers shifted, whereas, I was going to conferences for the conservatives, especially local in Alberta, I think a
yeah,
year and a half ago, and there was a lot of gray. I mean, my hair is gray, but we're talking gray haired, retired people were
yeah.
attending these things. And I'm like, wow, we really have to reach my generation younger, right? The Gen
Yeah,
Xers and the millennials and younger than
yeah,
that, because this will not, it'll literally die off. Conservatism will die off with this generation. And then they
yes.
flip suddenly
I
because of
know,
Trump.
I
And
know.
I was like, what is wrong with you people? You're the ones that are all conservative, conservative, conservative. And now
That's
you
just it.
flipped.
That's just it. My dad would
Mm,
have been considered a boomer, and I've never been an anti-boomer. I mean, I'm not online much these days, but there's a lot of boomer hate. And I always
yeah.
think that's ridiculous because I'm from Saskatchewan, where boomers are the most sort of conservative, reserved. You got your farmer boomers, hardworking, but it does seem like something happened nationally, and I don't know if it's because they're the most comfortable because they've already had their house and their job and they didn't have to
Yeah.
suffer through this, but it does seem, and I'm hearing again and again, that Gen Z is the most conservative. I do see that evident with my nephew who is 19, and he's in business admin as far as schooling goes, so he's learning about the economy, and it sounds like everybody in his class is, they don't like Trudeau or they didn't like him when he was in, and they would have voted for Pierre because this is the generation that wants to have a family and can't afford a house. And I mean, I'm in Saskatchewan. So for someone in Saskatchewan to say I can't afford a house, how bad is it for people in
Yeah.
Vancouver or Toronto? I mean, these
Hmm.
kids have no chance. And that affordability issue should have been the number one priority. And it was, until our
Hmm.
media just made everything about Trump. So it's interesting because I think we discussed this. There's who do you blame? Who do you blame for this? Well, as Christians, we're going to blame the enemy for deception always. In the background, the spiritual battle we know is raging. But when it comes to
Hmm.
just the human side of things, I would say it's a fault of many people. Yes, the voters, of course. It's always on the voters to be responsible. We're adults. We should be able to do research. But the media, just as always, took the stuff with Trump and ran with it. And the propaganda was relentless and the fear mongering. And then let's all come together as Canadians, which suddenly were patriotic, which is interesting because five
Yeah.
seconds ago, we apparently had no national identity. And our whole
Yeah.
identity is just anti American. Like, we're not American.
Remember, what was it 1 year ago? Anyone that was a nationalist, which means you just are proud of your country,
Yeah.
was a traitor.
Oh, yeah.
You're a Hitler. That's
Yeah.
how Hitler started. Everybody
Yeah.
was saying that on the left, that Hitler started because
Oh,
of
yeah.
nationalism, and
Yeah.
suddenly elbows up, elbows up, elbows up,
Elbows up. Yeah.
elbows
Yeah.
up, and now we're all nationalists. It's like
It's
it.
insane, Dave.
Yeah.
It's insane. And even just like you said, just a year ago, that term nationalist was such a dirty word. Or
Hmm.
even our flag. I mean, every July recently, it seems that you're being told that that flag, yeah, yeah, that flag is bad. That flag is
Hmm.
colonialist. We're a bunch of oppressors. Canada's a post-national state, which is the famous line of Trudeau from a few years ago. So it was interesting to me that as soon as the TV told everybody to be pro Canada, suddenly everyone's pro Canada.
Yeah.
And even to the point of just getting in people's faces. I literally had an interaction with a guy I don't know, a stranger at the grocery store, who I was buying produce and I got in his way a bit and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry," because I'm Canadian and that's what we do, right? We apologize even when we don't need to. Apparently, that's apparently our
Hmm.
identity, which is so sad.
Sorry.
We say sorry too often. So I just said, "Sorry, I was in your way," and he said, "No, I'm just trying to find something that's Canadian." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Are you buying Canadian?" And he just steely eyed stared at me like it was a test. And I said, "Well, yeah, but I always try to buy local. It's not because of
Hmm.
Trump." And then I guess that was a satisfactory answer. And then he relaxed and was chatting about other things. But I just thought, what if I had said no? Because I did buy, I know this is, I'm a trader. I got Mexican celery. I know, I know. You should
Oh
probably just
gosh.
kick me out, deport me.
Yeah. Oh, let's
So
shut
what
this
if,
down. How dare you?
get out of here, Kelly? Yeah. Who are you?
Yeah.
So what if I'd said no? Would I have been yelled at in the store? I honestly think I might have been because we're at the point where, and this is why it reminds me of COVID so much, this sort of
Yes.
moral, self righteous, virtue signaling stuff.
Mhm.
And Canadians are supposed to be so nice, but somehow we have turned into just horrible people that are willing to judge each other and kind of shove our opinions down people's throat. And there's this arrogance. We always say that Americans are so arrogant, but I see this
Yeah.
arrogance in Canadians, this idea that we're morally superior and that we're intellectually superior than those yokels in the States. And I find
Yeah.
it really hard to stomach. So I'm curious of your thoughts on all of this, since and I know we'll get into Trump because that was going to be the third part of my point. When we blame, who do we blame? And I know we've discussed Trump's role
Hmm.
in this and how he maybe should have kept his mouth shut till after our election. But I'd love to hear your take on how you've seen people acting online, in person. Because for me, I know there's craziness online, but for me to
Hmm.
have that in a grocery store and to see pictures of liquor stores, closing up certain sections or making it so you can go get a bottle of wine, but you now have to expose yourself as a trader, or just, it's really interesting to me seeing this in the general public. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we'll save Trump for the next step of
Yeah,
this conversation,
yeah.
but I'll stick with local Canadian. I think the topic there, and
Mm,
first I'll deal with the politics of things. Let's start with our good buddy to my left here, or like Alberta's left, which is British Columbia, who they
Mm,
voted in again, which was the
mm,
NDP leader. I forget his name off the top of my head.
mhm.
But I recall that when the tariff thing was happening, he specifically told people, because I think all of their liquor stores are run by the provincial government, or
Right.
big some of it is. Forgive me if I'm a little out to lunch on that, but I do recall him watching him on the news, and he said, "We're going to remove liquor or spirits from specifically red states." So he wasn't punishing the United States as a whole. He
Right.
was going to just punish Republican
Interesting.
states, so red states, which right there was that's a red flag. And then you had Doug Ford on the other side of the country, who I'll fight people on this, maybe even fisticuffs. He is not a conservative.
No,
I
he's not.
was there when he got elected, and the things he did during COVID and the things he said
Mm,
were liberal slash NDP.
yeah.
He talks like
Yeah.
he wants to be a conservative, but he is by no means, shape, or form a conservative.
I'd agree with that. Yeah.
1000% is not. I think Jason Kenney, who was our premier of Alberta just
Mm,
before
mhm,
um, he stepped down, he was not, he was a borderline
mm,
conservative, and in many
mhm,
ways he wasn't. So I
mhm.
think we have to look objectively, and I know it's a hard pill to swallow, that even conservatism, they say, I think in the United States, has not really shifted too far left.
Right.
Like the left shifted way left, and
Oh,
the right kind of was still where it was. Now that I think they were just judging by economics, not socially. I think
right. Exactly.
socially everything has changed left.
I
Socially,
agree.
both countries. But Canada wise, we have shifted dramatically left socially and
Mm,
slightly left economically.
mhm.
And going back to Doug Ford, he threatened during the tariffs to shut power off to the United States of America.
Right. That's
Like
right.
legally he couldn't do that. Like he got in trouble, I think, from some of the lawyers that were working for the government that said you can't do this. We have agreements with the United States with our water and our
Yeah.
power. Whether those are good agreements is irrelevant. You just
Yeah.
can't negate these things and say, well, I'm going to do this. It's one thing to tariff the power going out. You can
Yeah.
do that, put 1,000% if you think that's a smart thing to do,
Yeah.
which it's not, but that's your power you have. But to say I'm going to shut off and punish the average citizen of the United States of America for
Yeah.
this because of Trump's, uh, daily, I don't know if he's not taking his medication, but his daily changing on tariffs, we're going to now react the same way Trump does. That told me everything I needed to know about Doug Ford.
Yeah.
Again, he just proves himself through his actions and his speech. Then
Yeah.
again, he was dissing the entire federal Conservative Party constantly for the last 3 months.
Mhm.
So after Justin Trudeau stepped down, who he was good buddies with, he was always meeting privately with him, making plans with him. Then Carney comes along and he's making plans with Carney. He's calling him the best thing since sliced bread, and he's dissing the entire Conservative Party. Now, do the Conservatives federally have a bit part of that? Absolutely. Because what I heard today was that Pierre did not reach out to Doug Ford specifically many times.
Okay.
So he kind of slighted Doug.
Mm,
Probably should have done that. Also, with the East Coast, slighted the premiers that were conservative out there. Probably not the best plan, but
yeah.
that's something that should not cause a big, huge wedge, right? And
Yeah.
now I heard not one good thing out of Doug Ford's mouth about the federal election. And then what happened in Ontario? Way more liberal seats, I think, than were necessary or could have if Doug Ford had just stayed out of it, at least, right? If he'd
Yeah.
stayed out of it, it'd be a different story. Now, that's just the politics. Getting back to the people, no matter what conservative that's listening to this wants to believe, you can live in a fairyland, or you can live in the reality of where we're at. Morally, we are way left now as
Oh,
conservatives.
yeah.
Like the
Yeah.
abortion topic as Christians, we're going to bring that up. It is we're not going to talk about it. It's a settled item. So we're not even allowed to bring it up in the
Mhm.
conservative movement anymore,
That's right.
right?
I think even
Um,
Pierre brought that up in the debates,
mhm,
right? Someone brought it up because they're always trying to remind everyone how we're apparently going to become the handmaid's tale. So
yeah,
he said, no, no, I just want to make it clear we're not going to ever
yeah,
touch that. It's settled. It's kind of a golden calf in our society because they've relabeled it, of course, as just women's healthcare. So yeah, that's interestingly, conservatism has just we don't even have that discussion anymore.
Mhm.
So, not even about late term, nothing. There's just you
Yeah.
don't touch it, period,
And
which is
then
crazy.
what did he also say about the when Trudeau put in the dental plan and the early child care program?
Mhm.
He was not going to reverse any of that. He said, "I'm just
Yeah,
going to renegotiate it with the provinces because,
right.
understandably, the provinces actually weren't getting paid. We find out for all these
Yeah.
promises by the federal government, and I think morally we've shifted completely left. The
Mm,
discussions are over, and now I believe the conservative, if you've lived as long as I have, and you listen to Chrétien, for example, back
mm,
in the late '80s, early '90s.
mhm.
So Chrétien, I believe, until he got ousted by Paul Martin, Chrétien talked exactly like Polyev talks now.
Right, right. Yeah.
Exactly everything, whether it be economically or strategically for morality or anything ethic wise, they're
Mhm,
exactly the same. So
mhm.
our party has shifted federally, especially, and I
Mm,
think provincially,
yes.
completely to where the liberals were 20 years ago,
Yeah.
if not longer. So that tells you everything you need to know. Now, the conservative, or sorry, the liberal thinker, which is those people that voted for the NDP, jumped ship right off Singh because Singh is a complete utter. Forgive me for calling him this. He's an idiot.
Yeah,
He should
he's
have called this
terrible leader.
election. He should have called this election just before Christmas, like everyone was telling him,
Yes,
and they would
yes.
have been the minority. The liberals would have been wiped off the planet.
That's right. Yeah,
But because of his, everybody knows he wanted his pensions, and I
yeah,
have no doubt we'll probably find out 5 years from now. He was privately having backroom deals. Now, this is not proven. This is my speculation
yeah,
of the way he was acting, is that he was having private conversations with Trudeau and the Liberal Party to do whatever they wanted.
yeah. I
And
would agree
he
with that.
knew what was going to happen to the NDP at the end of the day. He knew it, but he didn't care.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see that through his actions. Actions spoke louder than words, right? So on
Mhm.
the political spectrum, he single handedly wiped out the NDP party
Oh,
and
yeah.
put them in a position now where they have no choice but to. I think most of the NDPs that are left are going to jump ship to the Liberals, and then the party
Yeah,
will dissolve. I think they're
yeah,
gone federally. They have
yeah.
no choice, and once
They have
they
no
do
money
that,
either,
yeah,
so
they're out of money.
yeah,
Because a lot of people might not know this, but NDP, whether you're provincial or federal, you use the same pool of money.
yeah,
They are linked,
yeah.
unlike the conservatives provincially or federally. They are linked as one party, and a lot of the provincial leaders told him to get out long ago, and
Yeah,
they. But they had a leadership review a year and a half ago, and he got in with 84%. So
yeah,
it's what, NDP people, you only have yourselves to blame for all
yeah,
this. And now
yeah.
you've become liberals because we know what you did. Now people went to the polls
Mhm.
and they realized these liberals talk exactly like my party and they
Yeah,
do everything exactly like the NDP.
yeah,
So again, the NDP have swung to become literally borderline, and you might not everybody might believe this, but they're basically the Communist Party now. They are the NDPs of our
yes.
generation.
Well, what they're
And
calling for is, I mean, even since 2019 when I ran in the federal election, you get
mhm,
your constituents, not to interrupt you, but just to kind of
no,
nail this point home. So we would get emails as candidates, and they would come from various activist groups. So there was different sort of environmental
mhm,
groups, green groups in particular. And really, when you were looking at the websites of Green, NDP, and Liberal, they were very similar. Liberals were a
yeah,
little more economically focused in the sense of some free market value, but the NDP and Green were almost identical. And yes, they were absolutely wanting government control over everything. Every debate, the
yep,
NDP said the same thing. So, what these emails would say is, here's our list of things we want you to commit to so that we'll vote for you, basically. And it's kind of a template. And they would copy and paste, and you'd get 10 emails from different people, but it's all the same thing. And it was
mhm,
basically, we want you to cut all these things, cut oil, cut gas, cut plastic, cut all your industry, cut everything that makes you any money at all, and then add, we want nationalized pharmacare, we want nationalized transit, we want nationalized. So what they
yep,
wanted was an insane amount of government funding with zero market um, value to actually add to that pool. So we want everything socialized, but we don't want to have
mhm.
any industry to pay taxes to get things socialized. It was absolutely what communism would look like. That is their
Yep.
goal. That is their dream.
Well,
So yeah.
but the difference between communism and what these people do is there's no industrial complex, right? Because they used to
Right.
call it that
Right.
back way, the
Right.
industrial complex, which was
Right.
we will make the farmers and we'll produce goods and we'll have factories and all that.
Yeah.
We'll be interdependent as USSR and as China is now.
Yes.
We don't have that. That was stripped away like 15, 20 years ago.
True. True.
All of that has gone to either India, Taiwan, or other countries in the world. We
Right.
allowed that
Yeah.
to happen. So if
Yeah.
you strip away the only moneymaker, which is right now the only real moneymakers in Canada is oil and gas
Yeah.
and our produce industry, which is anything farming related,
Yeah. Agriculture. Yeah.
agriculture, right? So agriculture, and that's nothing that to be happy about. We produce nothing. So we have no
Mm.
goods to sell, produced goods to sell to the world, very little. And I watched when I lived in Ontario, factory after factory after factory after factory shut down.
Yeah.
It was nonstop. Well, the actually since Trudeau took over,
Yeah.
it just escalated, and so even past this thinking of, well, yeah, we'll just get rid of oil and gas because we got to save the planet. And what do you have left?
Yeah.
There's no production.
There's
There's
no
no
production.
agriculture is controlled too, as you mentioned, right? Because
Yeah.
the Greenpeacers or the people that the climate emergency people say that the cows fart and they cause methane and
Yeah.
methane's evil and we
Yeah.
don't want nitrogen in our carbon in our atmosphere and all of these things.
Yeah.
All of those are byproducts of farming, right?
Yeah.
Or even to heat grain or dry out grain was
That's
they were
right.
using propane, correct? So all of that was part of the. You can't. People are so dumb, Kelly. So dumb. They think what we can hook up solar powered heaters or
Right.
something during
Even
winter to
even
dry
what they were
grain. Like,
right, even with the debate, they were talking. Steve was so frustrated, my husband was so frustrated because we're watching the French and then we watched the English debate, and this
mhm.
discussion, I think it was Singh that kept saying, "Oh, I wanna have this sort of energy pipeline, but not
Yep.
oil and gas." He wants it to be solar, and it's like, "You can't." Steve's like, "You can't actually store and transport the energy," and he explained it
Correct.
all scientifically, and it kinda went over my head, but he's like, "That's not actually physically possible." So what
Yep.
is he talking about? It's this pipe. It sounds really nice, as does everything in the world of the left, which is why I was a leftist back in my day. It sounded so nice, but then when you actually start to break it down, it isn't viable at all. And if you do want to have a bunch of social programs and help people, you need something to pay for that.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be government jobs, which is pretty much what we have now, is just an never ending bureaucracy that's growing. And that doesn't pay for anything. That's all taxpayers' money. So yeah, it's
And
kind of a silliness.
that's a slow death for any country that goes into all government
Yeah.
run thing because people that just tells me that you as a person, if you believe this, you don't understand basic math. Like you
Yeah.
don't understand that
That's right.
five plus, okay, so we give five jobs, we have to pay them, let's say, because government jobs always make more. Okay, we pay those five people $100,000 Canadian a year, which is
Yeah.
worth what, 20,000 US, but that's irrelevant. So you're paying five people $100,000. So let's say you tax them 25%.
Mm.
There's always a net deficit going on if
Yeah.
everybody's, working. No matter what, you're going to lose money, and then the debt will accumulate and
Mm.
accumulate and accumulate,
Mhm.
and you will be in a net deficit because, as you said, there's nothing to compensate to pay these people.
Mhm.
Not everybody can be a white collared worker. You have to have
Mhm.
industry, you have to have agriculture, you have to have oil and gas, you have to have something to compensate that's making profit. And I
Yeah.
know that's a crazy thing to say, that's a capitalist way to think, but that's the way the world works because
Correct.
no farmer's gonna sacrifice all their food for
Yeah.
free. Do you
Yeah.
like it doesn't work that way. So,
Yeah.
that's just basic math, and how I'm always amazed at how many people don't understand
Yeah.
that.
Basic math is people lack in, as well as a basic understanding of human nature. And we seem to
Mhm.
think in Canada that we're immune to, we learn in history about these terrible governments, about tyranny, about authoritarianism, and how things have gone downhill and gone sideways. And we just seem to think that that's not going to happen here. What do we think? That all of our government officials just have nothing but people's best interests at heart? I don't know why we think we're immune to that. So the whole thing
Mm.
with anti-capitalism is this idea of greed, which yeah, there are some, when especially with things like crony capitalism, there's a lot of, sketchy stuff going on, but you can still have greed in government workers. And so these human nature traits are not going to go away because someone is a government worker. They're not suddenly saints. It doesn't work that way. So if you
Uh,
combine a little knowledge of
yeah.
math and a little knowledge of psychology, just baseline, it's easy to see where this all goes. But I will dive into the Trump stuff. So I'm going to start here
Okay.
by just saying I am not against Trump. I'm actually generally a Trump supporter. I think TDS is a terrible disease. I think
Mhm.
it is kind of crazy what people think that he is capable. Like they literally think he is going to again turn the U.S. into a handmaid's tale, forced birthing. People think he's literally Hitler, right? It's crazy what people think, and
Mhm.
he lives rent free in everyone's heads. It's wild. So I am not that person. I mean, of course, if I was in the U.S., I would have voted Republican, if for no other reason than the left has completely the other parties lost their mind. But generally speaking, as a conservative, I would have voted for him, even though he can be a bit of a jerk. As a Christian, I do not look up to him as an idol. I think a lot
Mm.
of people have made him their God. I think that's very dangerous with any politician. So I would cautiously say that I'm a Trump supporter. Now, with that said, I recognize that he has some narcissistic, egotistical, bizarre personality traits, just a little, just a little. And when this all started, like his timing was horribly disastrous for our because people don't like Trump up here, even if they're wrong or right. That doesn't matter. That's not the debate here. The debate is not whether they should or shouldn't like him. The
Mm.
reality is, as you said, don't live in a fairyland. People don't like him. They've been told not to like him. Our media hates him. So whether you're liberal or conservative, 90% of Canadians don't like Trump. And so as soon as he spoke up, it just created this perfect ability, this low hanging fruit to create this entire narrative around him. And then suddenly, because people have short memories, everyone has forgotten the last 10 years of disappointments and of
Yeah.
crushing economical disaster. And we're assuming that any bad things that happen are going to be because Orange Man bad. And it was such an easy thing for them to spin. And suddenly, every leader is now supposed to explain that became the issue is we have to explain how we're going to stand up for Canada's sovereignty. And what bothered me with all of this was I felt like there was a lot of missed opportunities. I would say this with Pierre's team. If I was writing his speeches, there was a speech back in end of February because I remember we were on the way to Edmonton for an appointment and Steve and I were listening in the vehicle to Pierre's big Canada First rally. I don't remember where it was, and it was generally okay, but he started off with the same rhetoric that everyone else was using. And it was that same passive aggressive, smug Canadian superiority thing of, oh, Americans only do the right thing when they're forced into it. And just no, and all I could say is
Mm.
love or hate Trump, he's not a hard man to understand. He's pretty simple. If you just you don't have to fawn all over him and say, "Oh, please, Mr. Trump, don't take us over." But there would have been a way to find a happy medium with him and say, "We understand where you're coming from on issues with border security. We understand where you're coming from on your protectionism and wanting to get your industry back. We agree on that. Let's find a way to move forward because we disagree on these things. We're going to stand strong, but we get where you're coming from. You're doing a good job." Just a little bit of ego stroking instead of this woke nonsense about how we're morally more righteous than him. And I feel like even Pierre dove into that and it was a bad move. And I just don't think anybody on the national stage, no, none of the leaders handled this properly. But Trump made it really hard because the Canadian people just are easily sucked into the anti-Trump narrative. So it all became about Orange Man, and we all forgot about our own country and the fact that we have a lot of stuff going on here. Whether Biden was in, whether Trump is in, it doesn't matter. All of this is still happening. So that's
Yeah.
my thoughts. I am not anti-Trump. I do wish he'd kept his mouth shut until after the election, just because he made things really complicated and it wasn't necessary.
I mean, for me, I'm going to go a little more upset with Trump than you
Hmm.
are. And I'm not deranged by the man. I understand, like, he is a very arrogant person. And he's
Yes.
been that way. If you've watched any of his shows at any time or listened to him long before he was a politician,
Yeah.
this is who he is. He has never changed who he is. He's
No.
very
No.
arrogant and believes everybody should do what he says. But economically, especially his last term, he made a lot
Mm.
of sense. The
Yes.
things he was saying and doing, and even with, I know people despise it, but when he put Doge into power, and it does make mistakes, it's a new
Yes.
thing. So Doge is going to make mistakes, and hopefully, I know a lot of people suddenly hate Tesla, and Elon Musk. I don't at all.
No.
I think he's still he's the richest man in the world for a reason. Okay,
Yeah.
and he is a environmentalist. But he's a smart environmentalist.
Right.
Now to get back to Trump specifically, I don't know what happened to him, but he was arrogant before, and then he's gone to a different level of you will do what I say or we will
That's
crush you,
fair. That's
right?
fair.
And that is not a way to negotiate with the world.
No.
That's his biggest downfall is
Yeah.
you want to sit in a boardroom privately with prime minister or whatever world leaders and talk kind of like a jerk. That's up to you, but do not talk to an entire country
Yeah.
and threaten a country with annexation
Right.
because I am not an American. I am a proud
Right.
Canadian. I love my neighbors. I have great American friends. I love to visit the United States. We have probably 90% of all of our things are in common. But
Hmm.
at the end of the day, it's just like me saying, "Hey, United States, I'm going to annex your country." How do you think they would react?
Right. Yeah.
They would probably come guns ablazing into Canada and
Yeah.
take us over just for saying that. So you can't, and annex literally means I'm going to take you over. So we're going to
Right. Yeah.
conquer you.
It's
So a
strong
lot of people,
language.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's too strong, right?
Yeah.
And it's 51st state garbage. I know why he did it because Justin Trudeau was beyond debate. He's beyond debate a leader.
Yeah.
He is the most. I don't even have a word for him, right? But
Yeah.
Trump played on that, knew he was such a weak leader, got him to admit what would affect Canada. He even said it in the meeting, which was, "Oh, if you tariffed us more, we'd be in trouble." Like what an idiot.
Yeah.
Trump jumped on that, but went way too far with it, and
Yeah.
now threatened us. It's one thing to threaten Trudeau.
Yeah.
It's another thing to start threatening Canadians. And that's
Yeah.
what I took it as too. You're threatening me, and now you've lost my support. Now,
Right.
again, I'm
Right.
not a
Yeah. Fair.
Trump deranged person. I
Yeah.
don't wake up thinking I hate Trump. I don't hate the man. I just think you're an idiot for
He's
saying
gone,
that.
yeah, he's not, it went from potentially being art of the deal to, "What are you doing, man?" And even
Yes.
my conservative friends in the US, I have a really good friend that used to be on my channel, Grace, and she voted for him, but she said too, I'm not loving where he's going with this. She's not a globalist, but the way that he seems to just be alienating and bullying, it's too far. And I
Yeah.
kind of hear that from you.
If you want to sit down in a room with all these countries that you believe are treating you wrong, I get that because
Yeah.
I believe the United States was wasting a lot of money internationally, like we
Yes.
do, sending it to places it should never be sent, which is why Doge was created. So they were just
Yes.
burning through cash to other countries that don't need it. And then at the same time, getting some raw deals. I believe that, especially with China
Yeah.
and the European Union and Canada at times, especially with our dairy industry. So I get that. The
Yeah.
competition level was unfair. And yeah, any country should be renegotiating, but tariff is not a weapon, and all it does, and beyond tariffs, I mean, when you start really digging into it, you find out there's way more tariffs going on in the world than they ever talked about.
Yes,
Tariffs
isn't
were
that the
going
truth?
on, yeah, long before Trump started using the word and using it as a tool.
Yeah.
Every country uses tariffs. Now, he just went crazy with it
Yeah.
and, oh, 50% today, 40, 70% tomorrow, and he couldn't make up his mind. And that's not good policy.
No.
So if you're a schizophrenic person with your economics, now I'm worried about him economically, right? We didn't like him as a
Right.
person, but now economically he's causing a lot of issues. So I don't know who's in his ear, and that's the other
That's just
problem.
it. Yeah, I wonder
Yeah.
that too. Yeah.
So because he didn't act this way before, he was more of a he said things, but he was more of an actual at the table negotiator. I felt,
Mhm.
and he had the
Mhm.
interests of the United States in best interest, and as Canada should too. We want our economic to be the best it can, but let's be fair.
Yeah.
Trade is about you give this, I give you that. Trade, right? And we
Yeah.
get to a fair deal. So at the end of the day, Trump cost us the election. And again, we can live
Yeah.
in a fairy world. All it did was make us nervous as conservatives with the way he was
Yeah.
talking, because I'm a conservative, but you're not taking my country. I will die to defend this
Right.
country. This is my country, not yours, US. So, but we can be friends. We can be great neighbors.
Right.
It's like the neighbor ever said to me, by the way, I'm going to take your house over tomorrow.
Right.
Well, I don't care how good we got along before that moment, we're fighting.
Right.
Fists are going, right? Like this is my house, not your house.
Yeah.
I am not you. This is not your family's house. This is my house.
Yeah.
So just think of it in that level.
Yeah.
All that did was galvanize the left that were just sitting on the fence with Polyev and said, I hate Trudeau. I'm not sure about Carney. What did Trump say? Oh, don't
Right.
matter. I'm now, and that's why everyone jumped ship. That's why there was such a large percentage
Yeah.
of voters that turned out for them because all of them were scared that Trump was true. And I can't
Yeah.
say he's not being honest.
Well,
I
that's just
don't
it, is you
know.
don't know. It all seemed like a troll at first, but then it
Yeah.
got to be more and more repeated and more intense. And then he was talking about what I think was Denmark and everything else.
Mhm.
So you can't say what his intentions are. So yeah, like you said, it did, whether, and again, whether someone agrees with Trump or not, regardless, doesn't even matter. The reality is that it did affect the election. It
Oh
did affect how people
yeah.
looked at different parties because suddenly their focus became, and it was just a gift. It was a gift to the liberals because people
Yep.
were mad at that party. People were sick of it. People were scared of the economic future for their kids, for themselves. And then this was a perfect way to just distract. And like you said,
And
was it a real threat? Don't know, but it might be. It might
I'm
be,
gonna
right?
I'm gonna throw out a conspiracy theory I heard, and it did make me stop and think. I'm not
Hmm.
gonna lie. That said Trump is actually working with Carney to do what
I've
he did,
heard this too.
and I was like, is he that smart?
Yeah,
Or
who
maybe
knows?
not. But I don't know the intentions of his heart and what goes on in his mind. Is it possible? Actually, I stopped and thought about it. I said, after COVID, anything is possible
This is just it.
because anything is possible. And the people we
Yeah,
think are on our side are not on our side. So
yeah,
I think
yeah,
it's possible. Is it likely? Probably not. I don't think
yeah,
he's that smart. No offense to him in this sense. I don't think he thinks beyond the United States to this degree.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but did he do it deliberately? Maybe not working with Carney, but because he knew Carney would be a big pushover. That's quite possible. I think that's more likely that he sabotaged the election deliberately, and somebody told him in his ear, like, "Oh, yeah, say these things, keep saying them because it's
Hmm.
shifting left." And if
Right,
Carney gets in control again, you will you can cut everything off from him, right? Like you can kind of dominate him because he's likely as weak as Trudeau was. So
right.
possibly that's more likely than they were working together and there's a big conspiracy
I
going on.
agree. Like almost, and in fact, I kind of joked about it to Steve and said it's almost like you deliberately destroy a house so that you can scoop it up and get it at a steal of a deal. Because if you do put in the liberals again, we know that the disaster economically is sort of just it's a foregone
Yeah,
conclusion.
and
And so is
morally,
it going to weaken us? Right?
morally, that's the background Trump knows. If you study
Yes.
the way he would do things, that's exactly what he would do. He'd come in
Yeah.
and buy it. He would kind of sabotage something and then come in,
Yeah.
buy it low and sell it high. And sometimes it didn't
Exactly.
work. But that is the old way of
A,
economics. I
a
remember those
businessman
days.
Trump. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
business side, which is I don't really care about the people involved. That's the ethics. Don't care. I'm just here to make some profit.
Yeah.
And that would not
Yeah.
surprise me if he can't let go of those old ways, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to decimate this and scoop up what's left. So I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
China's been doing that for a couple of decades. So
That was my next point, was we are now just that much weaker for whoever wants to take over, because here's the other
hmm.
sad part of this